The animation starts with Garfield, a lazy ginger cat who loves food. He normally orders pizza using delivery drone, which he specified as the future method of delivering food. Everything has a beginning, so he decides to tell us about his backstory. It all started when he was a kitten. Garfield was left alone by his father Vic in a dark alley. A scared Garfield called out to his father, but all to no avail. He notices a glass house restaurant opposite him and the mouth-watering menu they served, so he walks across the street to the Italian restaurant. There he finds a young man called John Arbuckle enjoying his meal alone. Feeling sorry for the wandering cat, John lets Garfield through the window after Garfield enchanted him with his deep eyes. He instantly grows a connection with Garfield and then offers the cat a pepperoni from his pizza, but Garfield devours the entire pie in seconds. Because of his love for food, he then proceeds to eat everything in sight around the restaurant during a birthday celebration. While trying to find his new friend, John became worried, but eventually found him after he was presented in a box. To stop him from eating more food, he sneaks him out in the box of lasagna. Although John tries to lead Garfield because pets aren't allowed in his apartment, but then he realizes the cat has nowhere to go. Just then Garfield becomes emotional. This emotions became too strong for John to resist. So he adopts Garfield, but indirectly, Garfield declares this is the moment he adopted John. Weeks later, John moves into a bigger apartment to accommodate Garfield. Garfield was basically living the dream. As John provided him with everything he needed, he later adopts Odie the dog as a pet for Garfield. Odie became Garfield's friend and trusted ally, as they did absolutely everything together. Garfield enjoys taking most of John's food with help from Odie, who acts as his lookout. Garfield says that life for them is pretty perfect except for Mondays, of course. He had grown to be a big cat, but this perfect heaven would soon come crashing down. Later that night, after they have all fallen asleep, Garfield suddenly wakes up due to the rumbling in his stomach. He calls out Odie as they get up in the middle of the night for a midnight snack. While being indecisive on what to eat, Garfield orders nearly half the fridge, but two dogs, Roland and Nolan, show up in the kitchen mysteriously. Garfield and Odie is frightened by their enormous and scary look before they are being swiped and taken away. Garfield pleads his freedom, saying he could pay them off, but they are adamant to his pleas. Garfield and Odie are taken to an abandoned location. They tie them upside down for hours before a cloaked figure in a dark shadow shows up to set them free. He manages to deploy a way to set them loose, but just as he is about to escape with them, he calls Garfield Jr. Garfield soon recognizes the figure as Vic, his father who had left him stranded in the dark alley a long time ago. He is not too happy to see his father because his belief is that Vic had abandoned him for good that night. Before Vic could explain himself and get them out, they are found by Roland and Nolan's boss, a sinister Persian cat named Jinx. She treats him to dinner as they conversed on her early beginnings. Jinx explains that she lured Vic there by kidnapping Garfield because he knows he cares about his son. In her backstory, she wanted to be a famous cat with so many paparazzi, but when she went to perform for a talent show, she got stage fright and became an absolute failure. Then she met Vic and his crew. They were outcast, but they took her in and she became part of the family. After she had met Vic with his crew of cats that would steal and fend for themselves, they decide to go on their biggest score. They stole milk from a farm, so much milk that would last them for weeks, but Jinx was caught and sent to the pound, although Vic tried to go after her, but it was effortless. She was sent to a prison where she had to endure suffering, but it gave her purpose and she decided to take back her revenge on Vic. Luckily for her, Roland and Nolan helped break her out of the pound, and she became a free person once more. She wanted to get back at Vic, and then found out that Garfield was his lost son, so she kidnapped him to lure Vic. Garfield asks Jinx to give out her penance on Vic, so he could make things right again. She demands that Vic steal back a quart of milk for every day that she was locked up in the pound. After doing their maths, it amounted to over 6,000 quarts of milk. He was told to go to the same place he double-crossed her, and he should be accompanied by his son and Odie, or else she will have her henchmen tear them apart. Her henchbird tries to intervene and control her from getting real mad, but to show she means business, she devours her henchbird that also helped abduct Garfield and Odie, and then give them a limited time of 72 hours or else they will feel her wrath. Garfield is furious that Vic had abandoned him, and now he's back, and this time involving him in a life of crime. Despite Garfield not wanting anything to do with Vic, Roland and Nolan force him and Odie to help Vic pull off their heist. They tell him they are always watching. With no possible options, Garfield has to help Vic. He clearly states that he doesn't want Vic in his life anymore, and after they pull off the heist, they would all go their separate ways. Vic assures him that it would be a quick grab and go, and Garfield has nothing to worry about. Meanwhile that morning, John wakes up to find Garfield. His suspicions became fears when he found out that some of the fridge snacks were on the floor, so he becomes worried and begins to call out Garfield's name. While Garfield tries to calculate the distance and force it would take him to launch onto a train, Vic makes Garfield jump onto the moving train by launching him from a tree, causing Garfield to ricochet across several things including, somehow, a parade float of himself before landing in a pile of manure inside the train. Meanwhile, John goes on to inform the right authorities that Garfield and Odie have gone missing, but he ends up staying on hold for a whole day while trying to get help. Back at the train, Garfield and Vic argues. Vic tells him that he needed the skills to get a hang of the real world, but Garfield feels he's doing just fine and doesn't need a skill to steal from a dairy farm. He is utterly disappointed and could have probably been at home sleeping now. He then decides to stay away from his dad, but he's attacked by spiders and is helped by Vic, who points out that this could be part of what he needed to learn. The trio arrive at Lactose Farms for the heist, while Roland and Nolan continues to keep an eye on them. With so much children playing in the dairy farm and with a much advanced upgrade, including an electric fence, it became impossible to be just an easy grab and go. While trying to find a way to sneak inside, Garfield and Vic see Otto the bull, one half of the mascot duo for the dairy farm. Vic warns that he is in a state of meditation and depression and should be left alone, but Garfield sees it as an avenue for diplomacy and he could be the answer for them getting inside the farm. He goes over to meet Otto. He tells him that he is a huge fan and he could need a little help from him. Otto tells him to go away, as he isn't in the right mood now, but due to Garfield's persistent nature, he requests he sings the jingle to know if he's truly a fan. Garfield sings the lactose jingle with so much spirit, but then ends up getting knocked out. Otto sights his beloved cow girlfriend Ethel on the other side of the farm. When Obi notices he looks sad upon seeing Ethel from a distance, he goes over to comfort him. Otto explains that he was separated from her after his former owners were put of business and the new company that bought the farm put him out to pasture. Then uses Ethel as a playing tool for kids. He tried to break in to see her, but they stopped him every time. Now he only sees her 6 seconds twice a day. Vic then suggests that they can help reunite Otto with Ethel if he helps them get inside Lactose Farms for their heist. As their lives are dependent on this heist, Otto then decides to help. He maps out an elaborate plan for the trio to get inside. He represents them each with a token and then considers Garfield a lifeless possum, which caused a little bit of argument between them. He warns them not to go through the pine room and they should follow up his plan carefully if they want to live. He instructs them to go through a vent, and then after they have passed through all the required places, they should rescue his angel and set her free. Although he points out that they needed maximum skill to pull this off, so he proceeds to test them, but Garfield and Vic's bickering causes them to keep messing up. It results to Otto tying them both up until they can work together to get themselves out. They keep using the vine around them to beat each other up until Garfield vents to Vic over being abandoned. In an emotional flashback, Vic then tells Garfield the truth, which is that on that night, he had actually gone to go get Garfield food, but he had to wait until the restaurant employee would leave, so Vic can grab food from the trash can. But when he got back, he saw Garfield in the restaurant with John, and decided that John would provide more for him than Vic ever could. However, Vic states that he visited Garfield many times while sitting in an oak tree, watching him through the window of John's house. After Garfield forgives Vic, Odie cuts the rope, and Otto decides that there have been a progressive breakthrough in their relationship, although mathematically it would take them exactly 17 years for them to fully get ready. But since they have only 48 hours, he declares they are good now and qualified for the job. Meanwhile, Roland and Nolan go back to Jinx to let her know that Garfield, Vic, and Odie are ready for the robbery. Jinx, who had other plans to set the trio up, makes a phone call to an animal control station. Although they couldn't hear what she was saying at first, they decide to transfer the call to their highly obsessive and dedicated officer, Marge Malone, who is able to translate Jinx meowing to human speech using an animal language app, where she tells the officers that a heist is happening at Lactose Farms. Marge, who had been waiting for this moment, wastes no time in heading out to stop the attempt. On the day of the heist, Otto hands them a corn, which he suggests would be used for communication. He uses his binoculars to figure out a way they could get in. After finding out the best way, the trio sneak into the farm inside children's backpacks before making their way to the electrica room, with Maggie paying close attention to the Lactose Farm activities. They proceed through the air vents with Otto's guidance, and then end up in a part of the factory called the acorn, which Otto warned them to stay away from. Garfield ends up falling through the acorn but lands on a giant block of cheddar. Sadly, the cheese is being processed, which is bad for them. Vic eventually prevents the two of them from being chopped up in the processing machine, despite Odie's best efforts to save Garfield. Marge finds them first and has the keys just as they manage to locate the truck with all the milk. Marge takes Garfield and Odie to the pound after the three try to outwit her, but Vic manages to get the keys and escape with the truck. Garfield is devastated once more, deserted and abandoned. Otto, however, is repelled from Ethel by Marge's fellow officers using cattle prods when he tries to approach her. Garfield meets Snoop Cat and Olivia, along with the other cats from Vic's crew, at the pound. Vic is the object of their ire as well, because they think he left them. However, Garfield realizes that they are talking about Vic going off to visit him at John's house, where they state that he left a notch in the oak tree for every time he visited. Garfield thinks they were lied to. Just as John shows up to pick up Garfield and Odie after the pound contacted him using Odie's tag, and Garfield didn't even realize he has a tag in the folds of his neck. When Vic brings the milk truck to Jinx, she reveals that her true desire was to hurt Vic and have him taken to the pound as retaliation for what he did to her back then. Now that Vic is there, Jinx decides she has other plans for him. Garfield is excited to be back home and is getting ready to eat a huge lasagna feast when he notices the oak tree in the backyard. Garfield reaches the top of the tree and discovers that Vic actually left hundreds of notches for each visit. At that point, Garfield comes to understand that Vic has truly loved him all along. He then departs, much to John's dismay, with Odie to find Vic. Upon returning to Jinx's hideout, Garfield and Odie discover her board containing her entire evil plan, which discloses that she intends to kill Vic by plunging him from the train while it is crossing a bridge. The two get in touch with Otto and ask for his assistance in saving Vic before they commit to keeping their half of the agreement to get Ethel back. Otto catches up to the two and launches Garfield towards the train. They call in a fleet of pizza drones to aid them in their fight against Roland and Nolan with Odie's assistance. Garfield rides flying pizza boxes and causes the dogs to injure themselves before he gets to Vic. When they reach the bridge, Garfield pushes Vic away because Otto had set up a net for them to land on. However, it is too tight, and they are both thrown back into Roland and Nolan's arms, where Jinx is preparing to witness their deaths. The reconciliation of Garfield and Vic following their ordeal deeply affects Roland and Nolan, causing them to become enraged with Jinx. She reacts by shoving the four of them off the train, but she also topples over herself while laughing. Though Jinx gets entangled in the net, Otto manages to save Garfield, Vic, Roland, and Nolan. After that, Garfield fulfills his pledge by setting up a trade with Marge. In return for a caged Jinx, who Marge knows is responsible for the heist, she gives them Ethel. Otto and Ethel reunite in a passionate way. Vic bids them farewell as he, Garfield, and Odie return to John's place. Garfield and Odie go back inside, but after taking some time to think about it, Garfield runs outside to find Vic in the oak tree and invites him to stay for dinner. The two then hug for the first time. Inside, John is not happy to find a bill for all the pizza drones Garfield used. Vic continues to visit John for dinners until John eventually adopts him in full. Meanwhile, everyone who knows John, including neighbors and some of Garfield's neighborhood feline friends, shows up for Garfield's birthday celebration. The movie ends as John hangs up a portrait of himself and his pets as one happy family. In a vintage Garfield comic strip that appears after the credits, he asks if viewers are still there because they are anticipating a sequel. The end. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like and subscribe.